Hi guys, and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. Normally we'd be doing mechanics today, but yesterday I filmed two lore questions that were quite cool. I ended up only doing one in the first episode, so we're going to stick with lore for today. Hope that's alright. It'll be interesting to see how many people actually like the mechanics compared to people who like the lore. But yeah, and also I'm going to be putting in the second answer I had from yesterday, which actually when it was all edited down was only about 5 minutes. So I'm also going to answer another lore question, which was from Guild Wars 2 Schwix. Before that though, thank you very much to Joniis93, who's providing the footage for today's episode and probably tomorrow's episode as well. It's him in the Charr areas. He sent in about 30 minutes worth of stuff, which is really cool. You can find a link down in the description below if you want to check it all out now for yourself. And yeah, so this question, I'll answer this one before I go into the second one, which is the one I recorded yesterday, if that makes any sense, was from Guild Wars 2 Schwix, pretty sure I said that right, who says, how aware are the people of Tyria to the Elder Dragon threat? Other than the Norn and Lion's Arch, it seems like the rest of the world aren't taking them seriously. In the human area, I didn't see any real mention of them, other than coming across a small area with destroyers. But even then, will new players know what destroyers are? In Divinity's Reach, I expected to see at least a few worried citizens. This is a good question because it actually goes into quite a lot of things here. First of all, you saying about these worried citizens in Divinity's Reach, there's actually something I took away from beta that I can tell you right now that I thought was a bit annoying, really. A lot of NPCs in the Guild Wars 2 world, if you've noticed, do actually have dialogue that they say past sort of you trying to walk up to them and press F. A lot of them won't say anything. They'll just give you a generic "how goes it" meeting or something like that. But if you stand around certain characters for long enough, you'll find they actually have conversations they say together. And there are a lot of these conversations. I mean, ArenaNet have said how much voice-acted stuff is in the game, and there is a hell of a lot. If you just spend enough time in Divinity's Reach, you will find a lot that people have to say. However, it's so easy to miss that stuff that I feel like they're kind of missing out here a little bit. It's kind of cool that these conversations can't be played on cue, I guess. That makes the world a little bit more immersive. And I guess it means that if you were to return to an area like Divinity's Reach, say a week later, and run along and find some NPCs having a conversation you didn't see before, that would also be cool. But it does mean that I found it very easy to miss a lot of what could be quite cool lore that's out there. For example, the Great Collapse. I've had some questions about this. I'll probably go into it in a later episode. Some people have been asking about that. The district in Divinity's Reach that's completely sunken down, right? And this district, the NPCs around there, I spent ages just standing around pretty much every single one, because nearly all of them had conversations about that district, and they would talk about the reasons for it collapsing, and you would learn so much more about that district and why it has sunken, and it was just very, very cool. But these things were really easy to miss. So I mentioned this here because in your question you say you didn't find too many people worried about Elder Dragons or any worried citizens. I think there probably are quite a few around Divinity's Reach. It's just that we didn't really see them. I know I saw a few, and I definitely get the feeling or the impression that there are a lot more out there that maybe you're just not going to know about or really be able to appreciate the amount of them until you've played for like hundreds of hours in the game and spent most of them in Divinity's Reach. So it's a weird system in the game. I'm not sure whether I like it or not, because I can see it's got good bits to it and bad bits to it. Anyway, that's slightly more mechanics than lore, so hey, at least we've got a little bit of a mechanics discussion for today's video. But yeah, so to the question in general, how aware are people to the Elder Dragon threat? You mentioned the Norn. The Norn are certainly very aware, and I think that's mostly because of their kind of extra faction, their evil faction. I don't like to use the word, but the Sons of Sylvari. So as you may be aware, in Guild Wars 2, pretty much every playable race has got a group of that race that is against them, and these serve mechanically, I'd say. They've obviously all got lore reasons to be there, but mechanically it's so that you can play as a Charr and experience the thrill of fighting a human, and that's because you'll be fighting human separatists in a certain place. Or you can be a human and experience the thrill of killing a Charr, and that's because you'll be fighting the Flame Legion. Every race seems to have their own negative faction. Now in the Norn's case, these are some people called the Sons of Sylvari who worship and try to commune with the power that Jormag offers by corrupting people and turning them into Icebrood. And because of the Norn way of life and their view on society, they judge a person by their individual actions rather than the groups they associate them with. And the result of this is you can walk around Holbrook calling yourself a Son of Sylvari, and the Norn will kind of look down on you a bit and they won't like what you stand for. But they're not going to kick you out of Holbrook or be complete douchebags to you and cut you down because they haven't seen you personally do anything wrong up to that point. So there's a very cool dynamic there in Holbrook where the Norn are living kind of close to these Sons of Sylvari, these people who worship this dragon, and the result of that is the Norn as a race seem quite aware of the threat of Jormag, and that's just a very small part of it. I'd say the main reason why they're so aware of Jormag is the only reason they're down south in Guild Wars 2, as close as they are, the only reason why they're inhabiting previous dwarven lands is because Jormag destroyed their entire homeland, killed many of them. The Norn were going to basically commit suicide as a race to try and tackle this great threat Jormag until their spirits of the wild decided to say, no, look, this isn't enough, and the spirits of the wild guided them south. So they were forced out of their homeland. One of the spirits of the wild, the owl, died for this. And in Holbrook, you can see a statue to Owl who's dead. So the Norn are very much in tune and understand the power of Jormag. But Jormag alone, the other elder dragons, they don't really care about so much. And you can see that in the way they refer to Jormag. They don't call Jormag Jormag. They call Jormag Dragon, as if dragon is the threat. This one elder dragon, or 5, or 4 that the actual races really know about or care about at the moment. This is the one that the Norn really associate themselves with. They couldn't give a shit about any of the other dragons. It's this dragon, the one and only that they care about. So that's very much the Norn side of things, how they associate with the elder dragons, how they appreciate the threat. They do appreciate there's a threat, but only with one of them. And they've really developed a society now based around fighting back the Ice Brood. They've got this legend going on. When you're walking around Holbrook, you can speak to a lot of people and they talk about this legend of someone who will eventually break the tooth of Jormag that is there in Holbrook, who will stand to be just as great as Asgeir was when he cut the tooth off in the first place. And then that's going to herald a new age where the Norn can fight back against Dragon. So they've got all this stuff steeped in their culture, and this is the reason why, because they were pushed out from their homeland. The other races haven't so much had such a heads-on impact with them. The Asura certainly did with Primordus. The Asura, it's funny, last episode we were talking about pairing the dragons with gods. Well, a lot of people also like to pair the dragons with races, which actually works quite well. You've got the Norn and Jormag. The Asura, they do care and know of the elder dragon threat, but it was a long time ago that they had this serious threat to face, really. It was back during Guild Wars 1's time when they were pushed out of their own homeland 250 years ago by Primordus that they really had a heads-on with the dragons. And I suppose time has slowly made the Asura forget about that fact, as they've made Tyria, the surface world, their home, and they seem very comfortable where they are at this point. Obviously, all of the races are aware that the dragons are there, but how serious they find them as a threat will change from race to race to race. The Norn, it was much more recent they were pushed out of their homeland. The Asura, not so much. Then you've got the humans, who really, if you look at it, haven't had much direct impact with the dragons at all, not in these 250 years. They've obviously interacted with them in some ways, but nothing serious or catastrophic necessarily happened to the humans. A lot of the humans' downfall was brought about by themselves or by the Charr. It was mostly to do with that, not so much the elder dragons. So you can see why in Divinity's Reach, of all the places, this is really where you're not going to be learning so much about the dragons at all. Then you have the Charr, who recently had a huge scar cut through their land, the brand, because of one of the dragons flying over, Kralkatorrik. But that's really over in the more distant lands of Ascalon, not very close to the Black Citadel, so I can see why we don't get that much information. And if anything, the Charr are only pissed off at Kralkatorrik by proxy, because this brand has actually caused things that lived in those hills to now come and seek new homes in Charr land, such as the ogres. They talk about this quite a lot. The ogres are now trying to inhabit Charr land, and that's what's causing the Charr problem more than anything else. Having said that, though, we did see in the Gamescom demos, these were areas that actually weren't available in the beta. We have seen that a lot of Charr are fighting the branded actually closer to that scar. I guess it's just a question of where it's slightly further removed from the Black Citadel, from Rin, from all the places that are really core to the Charr. Maybe they care a little bit less. Also, don't forget that in Guild Wars 2, we're only really seeing the lands of one legion. We're seeing the Iron Legion's lands. There are 2 other legions. One of them's not even on the map. It's so far away. And the other one's very, very far north. So I guess that's why also the Charr as a race haven't really come to appreciate the Elder Dragon threat. Not to mention the fact this scar, the brand, was only cut through their land about 5 years ago. It may not have fully dawned on them just yet how dangerous this is. You could argue the other way though and say, well, it was only 5 years ago. Why wouldn't they be in a serious state of alert right now? As I just said with the Asura, they got pushed out 250 years ago and they probably cared more 250 years ago. But maybe there's just a bit of a lag period there. In any case, the Sylvari are probably the most interesting race because I've mentioned before on the lore episodes how the Sylvari seem to, you can piece together that perhaps they have been born directly to counter the Elder Dragons. It has been said by developers, obviously we didn't see them in the beta, but it has been said by developers that of all the races, the Sylvari early game stuff is most centric about the dragons, Zhaitan in particular, from the off. The Sylvari of all the races care most about the Elder Dragon threat, it would seem, and they are the newest race as well, which I think speaks measures about them. And really, it's the Sylvari that, when you're playing through the game, depending on what race you pick, obviously you're going to be experiencing different storylines. For 4 of the races, you'll be interacting with very race-specific problems. So as a human, you'll be learning about the Ministry Guard and Cordicus and all that kind of stuff. As the Charr, you'll be learning much more about the Flame Legion. As the Asura, the Inquest. But the Sylvari don't really have all those inner issues going on. They are 100% kind of focused on Zhaitan from the off, and you'll be fighting minions of Zhaitan pretty early as a Sylvari character, which is very interesting. So there is a distinction between how each race views the dragons and how serious of a threat that they think they are. But the game is structured in such a way that as you play for longer, the further into the story you get, of course, everyone meets up in lines Lions Arch and will eventually recognise the threat that these Elder Dragons pose, and eventually it just seems to become, if you look at the map, a very straightforward, right, we are here at Lions Arch, we are slowly going to work our way south. Though that's not to say that the story won't be punctuated with stuff to do with your specific race in later areas as well. In fact, I'd like to see that happen. Of course, we don't know that just yet, though. But yeah, they've really fleshed out a lot of how the different races view the Elder Dragons, which is good. It gives them a lot of identity, and it does play quite nicely into the question I was asked yesterday, which I will play for you guys now. The other question was one that got me thinking quite a lot, from Psycho Liu, I'm pretty sure I said that wrong, as I ever do with those kinds of names, who said, a simple question, though long to ask, most of the knowledge we have in terms of lore comes from the humans, with some coming from the Asura, the Norn, and the Charr and Eye of the North. Could it be possible that a lot of the conflicting information we get from various characters is simply due to the different races' interpretations of versions of history? For example, both humans and Jotun claim they were given magic first by the gods. Could it just be that both sides are biased? Is there any lore that we have is real, or is it all based on various people's personal, potentially incorrect accounts? This is a concept I love in fantasy games, and this is really, I feel like, why the Elder Scrolls has got such a rich and incredible universe, because Bethesda get that right. They really do. They make it very clear to you as you're learning things about the world that you're going to be reading a book in-game, and the fictional character that wrote that book could be wrong about what he knows, and there may be reasons for why he's wrong about what he knows. Now, naturally, because I like that, I feel like that makes stories and worlds far more compelling. I catch myself doing it quite often to say that the Guild Wars universe does it as well, but often I feel like ArenaNet aren't very clear about it, or that then that's not what they have in mind when they write 2 bits of conflicting lore. The truth is, there is quite a lot of conflicting lore out there in Guild Wars, in particular some stuff, like the official timelines they give you, they're just a mess. They are a complete mess, and you can't take anything for granted, because these kinds of things just overlap, and it doesn't seem like ArenaNet have an entirely clear view on their own lore a lot of the time, and it's a real shame. For example, I read you guys the story of Malkor the other day, and I told you how that story came from a post from one of the world builders just on the forum, and she just wrote it. Now, when she wrote that story to us, she listed all of the gods that were living in Ara at the time, and she listed Cormyr as one of the gods. Now, anyone who's half into the Guild Wars universe knows that Cormyr was not a god until the end of Nightfall, and yet we had one of the world builders here writing that Cormyr lived in Ara. And I don't think anyone for a moment even started to think, oh, what does this mean? Was Cormyr a god a long time ago, and then she was reborn as a mortal, and then she became a god again? Nobody believes that. We just know that it was a mistake that the world builders made. And I hate to say it, but I feel like quite often, it's not going to be as bad as I make it sound, don't get me wrong, but I do feel like often there are mistakes made that it's easy to make this excuse and say, oh, it's just that at one point we heard it from the Tengu and now we're hearing it from the Crate, and it's just that each of these races has a different interpretation. I think a lot of the time it's just that ArenaNet forgot about something that they might have written before. There do certainly seem to have been occasions where they have had this thing in mind, where you might be getting unreliable information, and there's a reason for why it's unreliable information, and it adds that depth to the world. And the reason why I mentioned it with that Jotun story before about their view of the gods and giving them magic and stuff is because I feel like that is a perfect example of that, and they have actually tried to pull that off. And I'm hoping to see a lot more of that in Guild Wars 2. But Guild Wars 1 didn't have it that much, not at least to the extent that the Elder Scrolls does it, which I think is, the kind of thing that they should be aiming for. A lot of the lore established in Guild Wars 1 was pretty solid. The NPCs, you could take it, knew what they were talking about. It wasn't very often that you'd hear some fascinating story from an NPC that you knew while hearing that story you shouldn't entirely trust. They never really went into that kind of depth, which is something I feel like is missing from the universe. So I've said all that, but at the end of the day, I am a big fan of Guild Wars and its universe and its lore, and I do have good reason for that. I say that there have been mistakes, but really those are just smaller things, if anything, that you'd just be picking at and you'd notice as you start looking closer into various things, where it does seem like a lot of the time it's just that ArenaNet didn't quite remember that they'd said something before that's now slightly different, rather than being able to fall back on this. But it does look like in Guild Wars 2, these kinds of things are coming forward a bit more, particularly with the books, the novels. I mean, Edge of Destiny, I didn't like that book that much for a lot of reasons, but one of the things I did think it did quite well was with Guild Wars 2, they really are pushing each playable race at the very least, and some of the non-playable ones as well. The Kodan are a great example, do have their own views on history. Like, going to the Kodan, in fact, they have their own views on what the Norn race are. They think that they're fallen Kodan, that they should be pitied, and that's what they believe the Norn race came from. And that's very much just a Codan interpretation of what the Norn are, which is brilliant, because that is exactly what I'm talking about and what I'd like to see more of. And as Guild Wars 2 is going forward, particularly for those main 5 races, they're giving us a lot of that kind of stuff, and we are starting to see that these people can have flawed interpretations of the world's history or their own race or what they think they're like, and I'm just hoping to see more and more and more as the game goes along. I feel like writing ignorance into certain areas of the game, certain races, certain characters, is a very cool thing to do if you can make it justified within the universe, and they're starting to do it, definitely. It's just, I wouldn't fall back on every little inconsistency and give this answer, because it can be used as an answer for all those inconsistency. I would say sometimes it's just that they've made a mistake. There you go, guys. I've been talking for 21 minutes. A lot of that will probably get cut out. But anyway, thanks very much for watching. Thanks again for the footage in the background to Joniis93. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.